It was the first documented pandemic in history. In 430 BC, ancient Athens was at its peak under the leadership of Pericles, when the illness ravaged the city.
In the summer of 430 before Christ, a crowded city sealed behind its own defensive walls began to rot from within, as fever spread through the streets and bodies filled the temples. Yet the real killer would remain hidden for 24 centuries, waiting inside the teeth of the dead. A city at war, a plague unseen. In the second year of the Peloponnesian War, Athens had become a city under siege, not just by Spartan forces pressing in from the countryside, but by the consequences of its own strategy. The great statesman Pericles had ordered everyone in Attica to crowd inside the city walls, believing Athenian naval strength could outlast any Spartan blockade. Refugees flooded in by the tens of thousands, overwhelming housing, food supplies, and basic sanitation. The air grew thick with summer heat, human waste, and desperation. Then, without warning, the sickness arrived. It started with a fever and a sore throat, but it quickly became something far worse. Victims convulsed with vomiting and uncontrollable diarrhea. Their skin erupted in ulcers and bloody pustules. Some went blind, while others wandered the streets in delirium. The sounds of the city changed, from the chants of civic life to the cries of the dying. And there was nowhere to run. With the city sealed shut against Spartan attack, plague became the new enemy inside the gates. Thucydides, the Athenian general and historian, would later write that the disease struck without discrimination, and that even physicians were the first to die. He had no idea what he was witnessing, only that it was not like anything Athens had ever endured before. Thucydides and the mystery of the dying city. Thucydides did not just survive the plague, he became its historian. His detailed chronicle of the outbreak remains one of the earliest and most vivid accounts of a mass epidemic in Western history. He described how the disease descended upon Athens without warning, how physicians were the first to die, and how the sick were left to perish in the streets as panic replaced order. His words carry the weight of both observation and trauma. High fevers, inflamed eyes, uncontrollable diarrhea, pustules, internal bleeding, and a desperate thirst that drove sufferers to plunge into public fountains in hopes of relief. The city's famed temples, once places of worship, became overrun with the dead. People abandoned their sick relatives, terrified of catching the disease themselves. Corpses were tossed into mass graves without ceremony or names. And yet, for centuries, scholars could only speculate about what Thucydides had actually witnessed. His descriptions didn't perfectly match any one known disease. Theories shifted with generations. Some claimed smallpox. Others leaned toward typhus or measles. Bubonic plague, caused by Yersinia pestis, was another contender, though it lacked key features Thucydides recorded. And more recently, some scientists even proposed an Ebola-like hemorrhagic fever based on the high mortality and bleeding symptoms. But without physical evidence, all of these remained educated guesses, anchored only to words carved into ancient memory. Athens had been silenced by a disease no one could name, not then, and not for the next 2,400 years. From bone to breakthrough. For centuries, the Plague of Athens remained a ghost in the historical record, terrifying but unprovable. Then, in the early 2000s, a team of Greek archaeologists excavating the ancient Kerameikos cemetery made a startling discovery. Buried beneath layers of soil were mass graves filled with hastily interred victims, likely casualties of the 430 before Christ epidemic. The bodies had been stacked with no regard for ritual, a sign of urgency and fear. But something else made the find extraordinary: the condition of their teeth. Unlike soft tissue, which decays rapidly, dental pulp can protect genetic material for millennia. It was in these preserved pulp chambers that scientists found their opening. Using PCR sequencing, researchers at the University of Athens extracted and amplified ancient DNA, searching for microbial fragments that might reveal the plague's true identity. For the first time, history could be tested in a lab. Initial findings were startling. Instead of viral material, no trace of smallpox, measles, or Ebola-like filoviruses. The strongest signals pointed to a bacterium, Salmonella enterica serovar typhi, the same organism responsible for typhoid fever. But science demands more than one result, so researchers repeated the extraction process across multiple teeth from different individuals in different graves. Independent labs in Spain and elsewhere confirmed the same bacterial signature. Cross-comparisons with modern Salmonella typhi. Strains revealed genetic markers that had survived nearly 2.5 millennia. This was not a fringe theory or circumstantial match. It was genomic evidence. Typhoid fever, long dismissed as too mundane or modern for such an ancient catastrophe, had emerged as the strongest suspect. And in doing so, it began to rewrite the story of one of the world's oldest medical mysteries, the answer hidden in the water. Typhoid fever does not spread through the air like smallpox or move with rats and fleas like the Black Death. It travels through something far more ordinary: contaminated water and food. And in Athens, during the height of the Peloponnesian War, everything about the city's environment fed the outbreak. With tens of thousands crammed inside the defensive walls, the city's infrastructure crumbled under the weight of its own population. Latrines overflowed, aqueducts broke down, and clean water became a rarity. Refugees were packed into makeshift shelters, sharing wells and cooking spaces with no means to separate waste from sustenance. It was the ideal breeding ground for a bacterium like Salmonella typhi. The symptoms Thucydides recorded, high fever, stomach pain, violent diarrhea, internal bleeding, confusion, matched modern cases of typhoid fever, especially in severe, untreated outbreaks. In modern settings, untreated typhoid can kill 10 to 20% of those infected. But in Athens, with no antibiotics, no knowledge of sanitation, and no means of isolating the sick, the death toll likely surged far higher. Entire households vanished. Even Pericles, the city's most celebrated leader, succumbed during the second wave. What's striking is not just the match between ancient description and modern pathogen, but how invisible the cause would have been to Athenian eyes. There were no wounds, no parasites, no visible invaders. Just a slow, invisible infiltration through the city's most essential resource. The very water meant to sustain life had become the silent instrument of its destruction. History rewritten, lessons relearned. For over 2,000 years, the Plague of Athens was misunderstood, its cause buried beneath layers of myth, speculation, and scientific guesswork. The assumption that it must have been something dramatic, exotic, or rare shaped how historians and doctors alike interpreted it. Smallpox, plague, Ebola. Each theory carried its own baggage, and each distorted the lessons we could have learned. Typhoid fever, by contrast, seemed too mundane. It lacked the horror movie mystique of flesh-eating bacteria or apocalyptic viruses. Yet, the very ordinariness of typhoid is what makes the discovery so unsettling. The disease didn't arrive on the backs of rats or the breath of the sick. It emerged from contaminated water, something Athenians used every day. The city wasn't punished by divine wrath or a foreign invader. It was undone by its own collapsed infrastructure. That realization reframes everything. The plague wasn't just a medical event. It was a political and urban catastrophe. It struck hardest when trust in institutions faltered, when the systems meant to protect people could no longer function. And it shows how historical misdiagnosis matters. For centuries, drawing the wrong conclusions about the Athenian plague led to misguided assumptions about how pandemics unfold. The real story is more intimate, more local, and far more relevant. Typhoid didn't just kill Athenians. It dismantled the foundations of one of history's greatest democracies. Understanding that shift is not just a matter of academic correction, it's a reminder of what happens when a society breaks from within. The silent threat that still kills. Typhoid fever didn't disappear with ancient Athens. Today, it still claims over 100,000 lives every year across the globe. But in recent years, a more dangerous version has emerged, extensively drug-resistant typhoid, or XDR typhoid. First identified in Pakistan in 2016, this strain resists nearly every antibiotic used to treat the disease. In modern hospitals, doctors now confront a pathogen with fewer options, one that spreads just like it did 2,400 years ago, through water, through waste, through the collapse of sanitation. The parallels are haunting. in refugee camps, war zones, and megacities struck by natural disasters. The same conditions that devastated Athens can return in days: overcrowding, failing infrastructure, limited clean water. And when they do, typhoid still finds a way in. The story of the Athenian plague, once thought to be about an ancient anomaly, is in fact a warning written in bacteria. Science may have solved a historical mystery, but it also uncovered a cycle we've yet to break. The pathogen that nearly broke one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations is still with us, evolving and waiting. A plague that once tore through Athens now echoes through time, not as a forgotten mystery, but as a warning. Typhoid still waits in broken pipes and crowded cities, reminding us how fragile civilizations can be. If you found this unraveling of ancient evidence compelling, subscribe for more stories where science reshapes history